All right. Right. We're here today, joining us from Amsterdam, Manal Daddah. And Manal, I usually like to start by asking people a little bit about kind of where they're from or where their home is. But we talked to you last week and you quoted a poem. And
Oh,
so can we start with the poem? Because that sounds like a good way to kind of figure out where home is for you.
absolutely. It's a poem by Nisreen Mbarki. She is a Dutch Moroccan poet, also poet of the Netherlands as of right now. And she wrote in one of her poetry collections, "Build me a grave, O mother, here and there." And to me, that was particularly significant because it also talks a lot about her in-betweenness, the in-betweenness of her identity, building a grave here at home in the Netherlands, but also building a grave there at home in Morocco. And I think that speaks to so many of us Dutch Moroccans because our identity is constantly in between two. And even within the group of Dutch Moroccans, our identity is still above that or in between that. So I think we're constantly looking for a place to belong. And especially when it comes to our final resting place, the place where our body or our remains are buried. I think that says so much about who you are and who you think you belong to.
Okay, so let's start there. Not with your grade. That seems, I hope, extremely premature. But just kind of where you are right now. So you're in Amsterdam. This is where you live?
Yes, I was born and raised in Amsterdam. My parents are both from Morocco. They migrated here in their late teens. So my mom was about 19 years old and my father was in his early 20s. But my grandfather actually came here to work. He was not chosen during the process of choosing Moroccan migrants to come work in the Netherlands. So he entered actually illegally. He entered from Spain to France to come and work here in the Netherlands. And he actually came to Amsterdam originally. He came to Amsterdam East, but he eventually settled in Amsterdam West, and that's where I still live.
So you said he wasn't chosen. So that doesn't describe your background, but still tell us a little bit about what it meant to be chosen.
So this was in, I think, the 60s when the Netherlands was working on rebuilding its economy and rebuilding its nation. And for that, it used guest workers from both Morocco and Turkey. And they recruited from the people who were working there, especially in the northern areas in the Rif region. They recruited hardworking men. They're usually men who weren't well educated, but who could work with their hands. And the idea was that they would come to the Netherlands, they would work, they would earn money, and then they would go back home. But this going back home never really happened.
And so you're still in the Netherlands. So he was rejected to be a manual laborer.
Yes.
Just a little resonance there. I did some family history this past year. I found an article. My great grandfather, an immigrant from Lithuania to New England, applying for a license to be a junk dealer so he could just haul junk and was rejected. So, yeah, but you're not a manual laborer. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there.
So I just finished my second bachelor's degree. I did my bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern Studies at Leiden University. And my first bachelor's degree was in political science. And I've always really been interested in this political world of the Middle East and of North Africa, also as a way to maybe understand myself better. My father was the one who was particularly interested in Middle Eastern politics, like every single Moroccan or Middle Eastern or North African or just Arab father is. And from that grew my own interest in politics, and he was always so proud of me. He always said that it was me who was fulfilling his own dream because he was never able to study here. So he was so proud that I was studying and kind of fulfilling his own dreams. But then sometimes I wonder, am I studying this for myself or just to kind of fulfill the dreams of the immigrant parents that I came from?
So, yeah, I'm listening to your story, and it sounds like classic happy immigrant story. Grandfather who has to enter illegally because he's rejected for manual labor, father who gets real interested, then daughter who already has two bachelor's degrees. Does that describe your life?
I think that's part of it. I think what I like for my parents is that they feel some sense of belonging in their identity. Because they grew up in Morocco, they feel that they belong there. I mean, they have their houses there, they go there very frequently, which is great for them, but whenever I'm there, I don't feel I truly belong. And whenever I'm here, I feel I belong here being in Amsterdam. I feel I belong, but sometimes I get these little messages from people that remind me of my foreignness, of my in-betweenness. And I think that's particularly why I chose that poem because it talks about a here and a there, this kind of state of in-betweenness, the state of stagnancy where you don't really know which way to go. That's why I like that in particular.
What kind of signals do you get? And this is in the Netherlands.
Yes. So it could be anything. Even actually, this happened to me yesterday where a colleague of mine asked me how I speak Dutch so well. And I had to remind him of the fact that us Dutch Moroccans have actually been living here for 60 years. And I understand his question, but it still hurt my feelings.
So I shouldn't ask you why you speak English so well.
I mean, that's different because English is not my native language, nor is it a language that's I mean, it is a language spoken here in the Netherlands, but it's not an official language here. But that was mainly because of just watching too much Disney Channel as a child, I think.
Okay, well, I would say you speak English like a young Dutch person, which means to say you sound totally comfortable, and I wouldn't even be able to tell that you were not a native speaker. And that's all Walt Disney.
Thanks, yes. It is.
Okay. So you mentioned going to the Netherlands. You do go there?
To Morocco?
Yeah, I'm sorry, to Morocco. You mentioned going to Morocco. So you do go there. How often?
As a child, we went every single summer. It was kind of this mandatory, travel that we did every single year, like a lot of Dutch Moroccans do. You will take this old beaten up car with way too much cargo even on top, it's just filled with cargo because you wanna bring all these things for your family and your friends and whoever else that you don't really know, but your mom knows, so you take all this stuff, and it's this 3-day trip, through Belgium and Spain, and then you take the boat from Algeciras to Tanja, and it's this almost spiritual trip that we've all been through, so it connects all of us together, but the older I became, the less I felt like I wanted to go, because the less I felt this strong sense of connection until I studied there last year. I did a semester abroad at the Dutch Institute of Morocco in Rabat, and it really showed me this kind of alternative life I could have lived had I grown up there. I'd met so many of my peers who went to university there who were the same age, but they happened to grow up in Morocco, and it was very special because every single time I felt like this could have been me. This could have been how I was to be when I grew up in Morocco. And sometimes there were these commonalities that we found in our personalities, like I said something and they resonated with them, or they experienced something similar in how they were raised, and they said, "Wow, you really are Moroccan." And it was this constant chasing of confirmation that I was indeed Moroccan, that I indeed did belong. So it was a nice time, but it was also challenging in the sense that you're constantly confronted with your own identity and sense of self.
Did you get complimented on your Moroccan Arabic?
I did not. You know, I tried really hard, and it's always these interactions, especially in the taxi cabs, where I tried my best to speak as Moroccan as possible. And it was one time towards the end of my stay that I spoke to him in Moroccan Arabic, and he replied to me in Moroccan Arabic because usually they reply in French when they think that you don't speak that well. And he replied to me in Moroccan Arabic, and I thought that was a complete win. But I think he just played along.
I see. So how long did you spend in university there? This
5
was 5 months, okay. And did you feel like you were a Dutch exchange student? You said sometimes they treated you, "Oh, you really are Moroccan." I mean, tell us what your experience was there.
We were with a group of about 20 students, some of us Dutch students, some of us Dutch Moroccan students. And I felt that the Dutch Moroccan students had this closer relationship to the people who worked at the institute. Like, they treated us more like family than they treated the Dutch students like family because they were so kind of othered in that sense. And we to them were closer in terms of our identity, in terms of our cultural knowledge as well. So I felt like we had this secret knowledge, this secret relationship to the staff also that the other Dutch students might not have had.
What was the language of instruction there?
It was English.
So you have to be trilingual or you're quadrilingual? Do you need French in Morocco?
In Morocco, it is ideal for you to speak French, especially in Rabat. In other parts of Morocco, you can just speak Darija, but generally the language that is spoken, that is seen as the elite language, would be French.
So what language are you most comfortable in?
I actually feel most comfortable in English, and besides from that, it would be Dutch. Yes.
I see. Okay. And so tell us a little bit about where your family is from in Morocco. I mean, is this where you go? This is where you go home to?
Yeah, so my parents, they met each other in Laraich, which is a small fisher town, about 30 minutes from Tanja. But my father is originally from the Rif area, from the Rif mountainous area. He is from the city of Targist, which is actually also the headquarters of Abdelkrim al-Khattabi, one of the most important freedom fighters during the time of colonization in Morocco. And my mother is originally from Taunets, but my father speaks Tamazight, the language of the Imaziren, and my mother speaks Darija and Arabic.
So help us understand a little bit about your father's background. You're identifying Amazigh as a language. Is it a language? Is it an ethnicity and nationality? What is it?
So Amazigh, or some people might know it as Berber, is this ethno-linguistic group in North Africa. And Tamazight is a language that they speak. It's actually an overcoupling term for three different types of languages: Tamazight, Tashilhit, and Tarifit, which are all spoken in Morocco. And the idea is that about roughly 40% of Moroccans are Berber. But then again, I feel like this is very difficult to trace. There is this rather colonial sentence, and it says, "Scratch a Moroccan and you'll find a Berber beneath." Also talking about how many Moroccans actually have this Berber nationality or this Berber ethnicity.
And when you're there, do you find people conscious of this? I mean, they think, okay, they're trying to classify you. Are you Arab? Are you Dutch? Are you international? Are you Amazigh? What are you? Or do people try to classify you that way?
I think it's important for them to know in order for them to categorize you. When they see me in Morocco, for instance, they immediately know I'm from Europe. But when I'm here in the Netherlands, we make this distinction between, are you Arab or are you Amazigh? Do you identify more as Dutch or do you identify more as Moroccan? And if you're in the middle, you kind of have to choose. So if not, you're stuck.
And what do you choose or do you choose?
I choose not to choose, actually. There's this wonderful study that was conducted. It was a doctoral study in 2014, and it was called Soulmates. And it was written for the University of Amsterdam. And she writes about these Dutch Moroccan students who go to university, and in their entire educational life in high school and in primary school, they felt very alienated. They felt so lonely because they didn't see anyone like them that also followed a higher level of education. And when they finally went to university, they saw like-minded people who were Dutch Moroccan, who were struggling with their identity, but were also highly educated. And she called this match soulmates. So it's almost like you're in a subset of this Dutch Moroccan group where you finally feel as if you found other people who identify in a likewise manner. And I thought that was exactly what I've kind of been looking for, this kind of small group of soulmates who also are in between all identities but still find each other in that.
But they find each other in a highly educated setting, and I notice you're quoting a doctoral dissertation, and you yourself, I know from a previous conversation, you did, I think you said a bachelor's thesis, I think it was on Amazigh, or was it Amazigh identity or something? So you're clearly comfortable about talking on this at a household level and as an academic level. Are those different? So if you start talking this way to your father, for instance, does he say, "Why did I send you to university?" to start analyzing me, or does he say, "Yeah, you got it."
I think he's a very proud Amazigh man. He is very proud of his own heritage, but I have heard some people ask, "Why do you study Morocco? Isn't there something you can study that's more relevant?" And that feels very personal. For instance, I did my first exchange in Boston, in Massachusetts, and I did my second exchange in Morocco, in Rabat. And the response of my family was, "Why would you go from the US to Morocco?" And it was as if they viewed this change in educational institute as some kind of, how do I say, some kind of downgrade, as if it's less relevant, as if it's less good because it's located in Morocco. So I feel like to them, studying anything that is related to Morocco is illogical.
Well, as somebody who's based in a US university, I'm not gonna argue with your parents about the quality of our education. But but what did you find when you came to Boston to study this? And again, that you're presumably studying it in a place where there aren't so many students like you in that setting, and you're much, much farther away. It's got to be much more sort of academic or abstract. What was that like?
I think studying at that university, I did follow a class on Middle Eastern politics, but it was more so an American perspective on Middle Eastern politics, so it felt very foreign. It constantly talked about them instead of with them. Whereas when you study in Morocco, for instance, or even when I study here at Leiden and I'm taught by these scholars who come from the Middle East, it's much more inclusive because it talks about politics from within and from the people itself instead of about them. So I noticed that that was a really big change also in talking about the region when I studied in the States. Uh, a lot of it was about the region instead of from within the region, instead of reading ethnographies, for instance. We would read American books about the Middle East, about changes in the Middle East, about American policy towards the Middle East. And that was a very different way of approaching the region and also approaching identities of the people in the region.
Okay, so you start in Leiden, you go to Boston, you go to Morocco, you come back, and you write. Tell us about how these various elements help form who you are in kind of scholarly terms.
That's a good question. I think that it also showed me that there is so much information to take from. When I was in Morocco, there were so many different topics I wanted to deal with. There were so many different things that were interesting. You could talk about the students that I met. You could talk about the people who partook in the Gen Z 212 movement. You could talk about the Amazigh issue. You could talk about so many different things. And you get this real bottom up perspective from it. And at Light University, really got to explore that more. So I enjoyed that from an academic level. You get both your personal knowledge that you gained when I was in Morocco, but also the top down approach that I was taught in the States and also at Light University. So it was this kind of mix of taking in these discursive challenges, which is what my thesis focused on, the Amazigh discursive challenges to Arabization policies, and looking at how these two processes worked simultaneously.
And what was the phrase you used? Discursive practices?
Challenges.
Discursive challenges. Okay. So tell us what discursive challenges are.
So after Morocco became independent in 1956, there were these unification policies that were very pan-Arabist. There was this idea that Arabization was going to be the new direction for Morocco to go into. And in that sense, the linguistic lineage and culture of the Imazighen was to be erased and subsumed under this larger Arab identity. And what I specifically focused on was how they discursively challenged that forced erasure of their identity, of their language, of who they were, of how they identified themselves. And I looked at manifestos and I looked at other forms of speech in which they protested against the forced erasure of who they were.
So what's interesting about our conversation so far is that even though you say you're studying politics, and when you talk about moving, you talk about national borders, going into Spain, taking the ferry. This is the first time politics has so much intruded. The various things that make up Manal are, I mean, most people have complex identities, but yours cross borders that are sometimes politically fraught. Do you encounter that in yourself? Do you think, where are my political loyalties, or I'm um, somehow being subject to politics here? I'm a participant there, but a subject there. Does politics impinge on any of the things we've talked about so far?
Absolutely. I feel that my whole being here is incredibly political, especially when we look at the recent events in Ceuta and Ceuta in Morocco, when about 60,000 young Moroccan men and women, and also mothers and fathers and children, crossed the border to go into the Spanish enclave. We in Europe all talked about them as these invaders, as these migrants trying to run to Europe and ruin our European countries and nations and culture. And we didn't look at them, which I found so difficult, from a more human perspective. These are people that are also trying to look for a better future. I mean, I was in Morocco 2 weeks ago and I spoke to one of the boys who was probably also one of the boys who tried to go to Ceuta. And it's this perspective where you understand the people more than you understand the narratives of the country that you are placed in. All the narratives of the Netherlands were so much based on these invaders that were trying to take over Europe, whereas we were dehumanizing the men and women and children and whoever who were trying to come into Spain because that's what they were promised, this amazing and better future. I remember when I was in Morocco, sometimes I'd talk to these men on the street because I always think they had interesting stories. And someone would tell me they'd see Europe Kajina, like heaven. And if these narratives continue to spread and they see that there's this better life out there that they can just reach, because it's right over there, right? The Spanish enclave, they can look at it from Tanja. Then why wouldn't they? And I thought that my identity was caught exactly in between those two layers of discourse. And that's where I found myself, particularly a political person or a political subject, I guess.
Okay, yes, I certainly did notice that. I didn't follow the whole events very, very closely, but again, international media, I mean, understandably, try to put this into some kind of political story. This is about migration. Somehow, this is about Israel. This is about European policies, and yes, the people get lost. I mean, in a sense, understandably. So, what do you see when you're witnessing these kinds of events and these kinds of political discussions in the Netherlands? What do you say?
I turned to poetry because I feel that is a medium I feel very comfortable in. And a lot of my friends were also amazing poets, through the same, and we tried to humanize and kind of bring back into perspective the sentiments of the people and rehumanize the people who we in Europe attempt to dehumanize. And I think that that is what I and many of my friends attempt to accomplish in the poetry that we write.
So let me just open up one final subject for conversation, and I don't know if it's poetic or the exact opposite of poetic. All right, you begin by talking about with a poem about a grave, but the image that really stuck with me when you were speaking is not a grave or heaven. It's this jalopy that's going back and forth between the Netherlands and Morocco, filled with, I don't know what you said, like probably food processors and medicines or whatever, and presumably making stops along the way. And you're experiencing this, not just you and your family, but this is like a way of doing things, a way that the people live. So talk to us a little bit about that journey. Just what was it like?
Well, first of all, it was very hot. We used to go in this old car that didn't have any air conditioning, cramped up with me and my mom and my dad and my two sisters, and all of these goods that we would bring to them. And we would have all these hopes for things we would be able to achieve and do and see in Morocco. And Eventually, we would arrive there after very hot Spain. It was always exceptionally warm in Spain traveling through there. And you'd have all these high hopes because, I mean, you've been dreaming and thinking of all the conversations you're gonna have and all the things you're gonna do in those 3 days that you were traveling. And you get there, and I remember when we would take the car, I was still very young, so I would get there and I would talk to my grandmother and I would understand her very well because my mother always spoke to me in Arabic, but I replied in Dutch. So I would understand her very well, and she would talk to me, and I would try to remember exactly what she said and how the words sounded. I would run to my mom and I would say exactly how the words approximately sounded, and then she would reply to me what I had to reply, and I would run back to my grandmother. So it was always this kind of imagined identity I would have in the car versus the real identity that I had in Morocco, which was very different from how I wanted it to be, and I wanted to be able to speak to her. So I guess that was to me most pertinent in those trips, this imagination versus lived reality.
And you know other people who made these kinds of trips?
So many of us. I mean, there has even been a movie about the trip and about what the trip would look like if we would take it right now. It's a movie called Porte Bagage, released by Asma Al-Fassi and Abdelkrim Al-Fassi. And it talks about this girl who travels with her brothers and her sister to bring their father who's suffering from dementia to Morocco because he decides that that's his final resting place. He doesn't want to bother them anymore with his illness, so he wants to go to Morocco, but he wants to go in a car because he wants that final trip to Morocco to be exactly as it was when they were younger. So they take this very, very old Mercedes T1, the big bus, and they'd load it up with stuff and they would go on their trip to Morocco. And in the trip, she would have this in-betweenness of her identity because she wanted to be that daughter that takes care of the family and that goes on these trips to Morocco and that speaks Dutch so well, but simultaneously she also wants to be that Dutch girl who works hard and who has this successful career, and she's kind of stuck in between, and that's what the movie is about, where the journey is also a journey for herself to find out which path her identity is taking. And I thought that was a beautiful way to kind of, for the last time, commemorate how important that journey was to us.
And it's interesting that when we talk about the trip, you talk about the trip from the Netherlands to Morocco, you talk about arrival, you don't talk about the return. What was the return like?
It was very silent. 'Cause, I mean, the car wouldn't be full anymore. A lot of the goods that we had on our way there were dropped off, or we'd put them in the house in Morocco that we had built or bought that we never really used. And it was this very silent return to a place where you'll have to share these stories and no one will really understand, I think.
That's what I'm wondering about. So when you get back, are you thinking, "Oh, now I'm home. This is what's familiar," or, "Wait, this place suddenly looks different. Nobody understands me."
I think it's a good in between. You feel home. When I refer to home, I always talk about Amsterdam. I don't talk about the Netherlands, but I specifically talk about the city of Amsterdam. But when I get back here, to me, home is more with my friends and more with the people who have come to make space for me and my identity than it is really the country. So if I could bring all of my friends in one big bag and I would drop them off in Morocco, I think it would be great too.
Okay. Alright, well, thank you very much. This is fascinating story.
So to end this episode, I thought it would be nice to quote a poem from a friend of mine who was also a very successful spoken word artist. Her name is Esma Amadou, and she writes, "For the grandparents, I hope that we were worth the journey in every single story. For the motherlands, may we always hold each other in love."
Oh, wow. Thank you. I'm a grandparent. I hope someday my grandkids will read that to me.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Manel. Thanks for joining us.
Was that what you expected? Or was it different from what you hoped it was going to be?